In the early part of American history, there were five wars that really helped shape our country. First of all, the founding of our country, as we're going to see today with the Revolutionary War, but all the way up to our country becoming a world power. What we're going to do is spend a little bit of time the next couple of days looking at um, these five early American wars. So basically, the wars from the Revolutionary War in 1775 up until the Spanish American War in 1898. And then we're going to spend a little bit more time focusing in on World War One. Hopefully, a lot of this stuff is review, especially up through the Civil War. Probably stuff that you've covered in eighth grade history. And so, as we go through, just want to take you through just kind of a brief rundown of the war, and then I've got a special kind of pull-out section for each one. So, like today, we're going to look at the Revolutionary War, and we're also going to look at some of the art that comes out from the Revolutionary War. So you'll have two of these to watch each day. We're talking about the wars. If you're at home, working virtually, uh, this you're going to pick one of these wars to focus on. So this will give you a little bit of an idea there. But these should also allow you to get a little bit of information on all the wars for those compare and contrast that you're going to be doing. So first up is the Revolutionary War. Our opponent in the Revolutionary War is the British Empire. Their leader at the time is a guy named King George III. And we all know that the United States started out as British colonies. And so this is a war for independence from Great Britain. It's going to last from 1775 to 1783, really till 1781 is kind of the big chunk of time. By the time the peace treaty gets signed and all that sort of thing, it's 1783. Casualties, American deaths in the Revolutionary War. You've got 6,800 men that will die just from wounds in battle. A lot more from disease, and you're going to see this, especially leading up in these wars up until World War One, with the discovery of penicillin and antibiotics. That there's usually a lot more death from disease in these conflicts than an actual battle itself. Um, the causes of the Revolutionary War, most famously, right, the idea of no taxation without representation. There'd been another war on this continent before the Revolutionary War, and it was called the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War was a war between the British and the French, and they are fighting for dominance here on the North American continent. You had Native Americans on both sides, and when the conflict ends, Britain emerges victorious, but it costs them a lot of money. And so they say, well, hey, we were fighting here in the New World for uh, the protection of these colonists. They should help pay for it. And so they started to put these laws on the books, things like the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, that charged taxes on the colonist for this. Um, the problem, as the colonists saw it, was they didn't have any representation in British Parliament, and so they didn't have any say on these taxes that were being put on them, and that's where that slogan is going to come from. You've got big events like the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, and then eventually the coming together of a Continental Congress, representatives from all of the 13 colonies, to talk about what they wanted to do in this conflict with Great Britain, and what they will eventually decide to do is declare their independence. Famous names of the war. George Washington is by far the most famous name. He'd been an officer in the British military, but he's going to be tagged to lead the Continental Army. And so he's going to be the military leader through the Revolutionary War. Got a couple of other guys there for you, though. Upper right hand side is Benedict Arnold. And in the other slideshow I've got there for you, we're going to talk a little bit more about Benedict Arnold, but of course his name becomes synonymous with being a traitor, and so he is going to start out on the side of the colonials, but when he feels like he's being underappreciated, mistreated, he eventually will go over to the British side. Down below, you've got Lord Cornwallis, who was a uh, general for the British military. We saw him represented in the Patriot, and again, just really kind of indicative of that style of just honor and the way you fighting a war reflecting on you. You see in the person of General Cornwallis. So there are definitely some big guys there. I encourage you to take a look at some of the other folks who will be very famous. Turning points in the war. So I just kind of picked out a couple of the famous battles. That's going to be easy to do in some of these wars. It's more difficult in others. In the Revolutionary War, the war really gets started with the battles of Lexington and Concord. Now, of course, Lexington and Concord, our own Lexington, Indiana, is named after Lexington in Massachusetts. The British had marched to these two places because they had gotten word that people were building up caches of guns and ammunition, things like that, in case there was going to be a rebellion. And so they end up coming out there to try to intercept those. Very famously, Paul Revere will ride through the streets. Right, there's a dramatic poem about Paul Revere warning people that the military was on its way. He'd say the British are coming, but everybody's British at that point. So probably said was something closer to the regulars are coming. When nobody knows who fires the first shot of the Revolutionary War, but setting off this conflict isn't just going to mean a lot for us in the United States. It's going to set off kind of a revolutionary spirit around the world. The Battle of Saratoga was also a very important battle. Saratoga, really what we needed to do is we need some help fighting against the British. This battle convinces the French that an investment in the American cause is worthwhile, and so they'll eventually join the war on our side. At the end of the Patriot, we saw the Battle of Cowpens, where Benjamin Martin and his militia are able to kind of trick the British and win a giant victory there. And then, of course, the Battle of Yorktown, 1781. Cornwallis will surrender at Yorktown. He's surrounded by the colonials on land, the French by sea, and is forced to give up his army. Now, we also want to look at what weapons look like as we go through these wars. These are some of the weapons that would have been used. We've got a musket for you there on the left, a cannon top right, and a mortar on the bottom. Muskets at this time were smooth bore, which basically meant the barrel of the musket was smooth. And what they would use is what were called mini balls. And so just little round chunks of metal that were being used as bullets. These things are kind of notoriously inaccurate and will be for the first couple of wars that we're going to take a look at. It's one of the reasons you have the lining up in lines and that sort of thing as far as the fighting goes. A couple of different types of cannonballs and mortars they would use. Sometimes they were solid, so you're just sending a big piece of metal bouncing at hundreds of miles an hour through groups of men. They also had some that would explode, have stuff inside of them, things like that. But another thing we're going to ask you to look at is kind of the technology of the war. So if this is something you're interested in, then kind of dig into that and learn a little bit more about the weapons they're using. On the home front, the interesting thing is we usually think of everybody kind of being united against the British, and the majority of people were. It's about a 70-30 split, but you did have 30% of people that wanted to remain loyal to the British crown. As you can imagine, things got awkward for them when the Revolutionary War went to the colonials. Native Americans and slaves actually, probably the majority of them are rooting for the British. They knew they were going to be better treated by the British Empire. British Empire offered freedom for slaves who fought for their cause. They were also known to be a little nicer in their dealings with Native American groups. Women in the Revolutionary War, women couldn't fight in the Revolutionary War, but they either kind of stayed home and made sure things were running while the man of the house was away, or sometimes the families would actually go with the soldiers, and the women would keep up the camps, cook, clean, do that sort of thing. Probably the most famous woman is a lady named Molly Pitcher, and I actually tell her story in our um, in our video on Revolutionary Art. So check that out to see her story. Revolutionary War ends with the Treaty of Paris. The immediate effect is the birth of the United States. Right, we've got our own country. It has made a celebrity out of George Washington. George Washington will go home to Mount Vernon, but eventually be drawn back into public life with the birth of the new Constitution, and he'll become our first president. Bad news here is we settle on the Articles of Confederation for our written form of government first, which wasn't spectacular. We've already talked about what some of the problems were with that one. But the big deal here is the United States becomes a country of its own. So you could argue that the Revolutionary War is the most important war in our history, especially of these early wars that we're going to be taking a look at. Not only is this going to happen here, though, but you see this revolutionary spirit start to take off around the world. It's not too long before we'll see the French Revolution happen in France, and you've got colonies all around the world asking questions about um, their relationship with the colonizing countries. And so that's a little bit about the Revolutionary War. Like I said, hopefully just kind of a little bit of review, just kind of activate some stuff that you had earlier. But as you dig into the research there, hopefully I'll give you enough of a foundation to move on in what we need you to be doing.